There was the familiar figure of the general, with his air of a well-fed and extremely healthy tomcat, and there was another man, seated at the general's desk. He could not see the other man very well. The crack made him bulge and waver, but he did not like his being there. "Well, Professor," said the general, in an easy, purring voice. Malzius's entire body jerked. He had made a fearful and unpardonable omission. He must remedy it at once. "Long live the state," he shouted in a loud, thick voice, and saluted. He knew, bitterly, that his salute was ridiculous and that he looked ridiculous, making it. But perhaps the general would laugh. He had done so before. Then everything would be all right, for it was not quite as easy to beat a man after you had laughed at him. The general did not laugh. He made a half-turn instead toward the man at the desk. The gesture said, "You see, he is well trained." It was the gesture of a man of the world, accustomed to deal with unruly peasants and animals. The gesture of a man fitted to be general. The man at the desk paid no attention to the general's gesture. He lifted his head, and Malzius saw him more clearly and with complete unbelief. It was not a man, but a picture come alive. Professor Malzius had seen the picture 100 times. They had made him salute and take off his hat in front of it when he had had a hat. Indeed, the picture had presided over his beatings. The man himself was a little smaller, but the picture was a good picture. There were many dictators in the world, and this was one type. The face was white, beaky, and semi-Napoleonic. The lean, military body sat squarely in its chair. The eyes dominated the face, and the mouth was rigid. I remember also a hypnotist and a woman Charcot showed me at his clinic in Paris, thought Professor Malzius. But there is also, obviously, an endocrine unbalance. Then his thought stopped. "Tell the man to come closer," said the man at the desk. "Can he hear me? Is he deaf?" "No, Your Excellency," said the general, with enormous, purring respect. "But he is a little old, though perfectly healthy. Are you not, Professor Malzius?" "Yes, I am perfectly healthy. I am very well treated here," said Professor Malzius, in his loud, thick voice. They were not going to catch him with traps like that, not even by dressing up somebody as the dictator. He fixed his eyes on the big, old-fashioned inkwell on the general's desk. That at least was perfectly sane. "Come closer," said the man at the desk to Professor Malzius, and the latter advanced till he could almost touch the inkwell with his fingers. Then he stopped with a jerk, hoping he had done right. The movement removed the man at the desk from the crack in his lenses, and Professor Malzius knew suddenly that it was true. This was indeed the dictator, this man with the rigid mouth. He began to talk. "I have been very well treated here, and the general has acted with the greatest consideration," he said. "But I am Professor Gregor Malzius, professor of biochemistry. For 30 years I have lectured at the university. I am a fellow of the Royal Society, a corresponding member of the Academy of Sciences at Berlin, at Rome, at Boston, at Paris, and Stockholm. I have received the Nottingham Medal, the Lamarck Medal, the Order of St. John of Portugal, and the Nobel Prize. I think my blood count is low, but I have received a great many degrees, and my experiments on the migratory cells are not finished. I do not wish to complain of my treatment, but I must continue my experiments." He stopped, like a clock that has run down, surprised to hear the sound of his own voice. He noted, in one part of his mind, that the general had made a move to silence him, but had himself been silenced by the dictator. "Yes, Professor Malzius," said the man at the desk, in a harsh, toneless voice. "There has been a regrettable error." The rigid face stared at Professor Malzius. Professor Malzius stared back. He did not say anything. "In these days," said the dictator, his voice rising, "the nation demands the submission of every citizen. Encircled by jealous foes, our reborn land yet steps forward toward her magnificent destiny." The words continued for some time. The voice rose and fell. Professor Malzius listened respectfully. He had heard the words many times before, and they had ceased to have meaning to him. He was thinking of certain cells of the body that rebel against the intricate processes of nature and set up their own bellicose state. Doubtless they, too, have a destiny, he thought, but in medicine it is called cancer. Jealous and spiteful tongues in other countries have declared that it is our purpose to wipe out learning and science, concluded the dictator. That is not our purpose. After the cleansing, the rebirth, we mean to move forward to the greatest science in the world, our own science, based on the enduring principles of our nationhood. He ceased abruptly. His eyes fell into their dream. Very like the girl Charcot showed me in my young days, thought Professor Malzius. There was first the ebullition, then the calm. I was part of the cleansing? You did not mean to hurt me? He asked timidly. Yes, Professor Malzius, said the general, smiling. You were part of the cleansing. Now that is over. His Excellency has spoken. I do not understand, said Professor Malzius, gazing at the fixed face of the man behind the desk. It is very simple, said the general. He spoke in a slow, careful voice, as one speaks to a deaf man or a child. You are a distinguished man of science. You have received the Nobel Prize. That was a service to the state. You became, however, infected by the wrong political ideas. That was treachery to the state. You had, therefore, as decreed by His Excellency, to pass through a certain period for probation and rehabilitation. But that, we believe, is finished. You do not wish to know the names of the young men anymore, said Professor Malzius. You do not want the addresses? That is no longer of importance, said the general patiently. There is no longer opposition. The leaders were caught and executed 3 weeks ago. There is no longer opposition, repeated Professor Malzius. At the trial, you were not even involved. I was not even involved, said Professor Malzius. Yes. Now, said the general, with a look at the dictator, we come to the future. I will be frank. The new state is frank with its citizens. It is so, said the dictator, his eyes still sunk in his dream. There has been, let us say, a certain agitation in foreign countries regarding Professor Malzius, said the general, his eyes still fixed on the dictator. That means nothing, of course. Nevertheless, your acquaintance, Professor Benét, and others have meddled in matters that do not concern them. They asked after me, said Professor Malzius with surprise. It is true, my experiments were reaching a point that no foreign influence could turn us from our firm purpose, said the dictator. But it is our firm purpose to show our nation first in science and culture, as we have already shown her first in manliness and statehood. For that reason, you are here, Professor Malzius. He smiled. Professor Malzius stared. His cheeks began to tremble. I do not understand, said Professor Malzius. You will give me my laboratory back? Yes, said the dictator, and the general nodded as one nods to a stupid child. Professor Malzius passed a hand across his brow. My post at the university, he said. My experiments? It is the purpose of our regime to offer the fullest encouragement to our loyal sons of science, said the dictator. First of all, said Professor Malzius, I must go to a hospital. My blood count is poor, but that will not take long. His voice had become impatient, and his eyes glowed. Then my notebooks were burned, I suppose. That was silly, but we can start in again. I have a very good memory, an excellent memory. The theories are in my head, you know. And he tapped it. I must have assistants, of course. Little Grigopoulos was my best one. The man Grigopoulos has been executed, said the general in a stern voice. You had best forget him. Oh, said Professor Malzius. Well, then I must have someone else. You see, these are important experiments. There must be some young men, clever ones. They cannot all be dead. I will know them. He laughed a little nervously. The bear always got the pick of the crop, he said. They used to call me the bear, you know. He stopped and looked at them for a moment with ghastly eyes. You are not fooling me, he said. He burst into tears. When he recovered, he was alone in the room with the general. The general was looking at him as he himself had looked once at strange forms of life under the microscope, with neither disgust nor attraction, but with great interest. His Excellency forgives your unworthy suggestion, he said. He knows you are overwrought. Yes, said Professor Malzius. He sobbed once and dried his glasses. Come, come, said the general, with a certain bluff heartiness. We mustn't have our new president of the National Academy crying. It would look badly in the photographs. President of the Academy, said Professor Malzius quickly. Oh no, I mustn't be that. They make speeches, they have administrative work. But I am a scientist, a teacher. I'm afraid you can't very well avoid it, said the general, still heartily, though he looked at Professor Malzius. Your induction will be quite a ceremony. His Excellency himself will preside, and you will speak on the new glories of our science. It will be a magnificent answer to the petty and jealous criticisms of our neighbors. Oh, you needn't worry about the speech, he added quickly. It will be prepared. You will only have to read it. His Excellency thinks of everything. Very well, said Professor Malzius. And then may I go back to my work? Oh, don't worry about that, said the general, smiling. I'm only a simple soldier. I don't know about those things. But you'll have plenty of work. The more the better, said Malzius eagerly. I still have 10 good years. He opened his mouth to smile, and a shade of dismay crossed the general's face. Yes, he said, as if to himself. The teeth must be attended to. At once. An arrest, undoubtedly, before the photographs are taken. Milk, you are feeling sufficiently well, Professor Malzius? I am very happy, said Professor Malzius. I have been very well treated, and I come of peasant stock. Good, said the general. He paused for a moment and spoke in a more official voice. Of course, it is understood, Professor Malzius, he said. Yes, said Professor Malzius. I beg your pardon. I was thinking of something else. It is understood, Professor Malzius, repeated the general, that your rehabilitation in the service of the state is a permanent matter. Naturally, you will be under observation, but even so, there must be no mistake. I am a scientist, said Professor Malzius impatiently. What have I to do with politics? If you wish me to take oaths of loyalty, I will take as many as you wish. I am glad you take that attitude, said the general, though he looked at Professor Malzius curiously. I may say that I regret the unpleasant side of our interviews. I trust you bear no ill will. Why should I be angry, said Professor Malzius. You were told to do one thing. Now you are told to do another. That is all. It is not quite so simple as that, said the general rather stiffly. He looked at Professor Malzius for a third time. And I'd have sworn you were one of the stiff-necked ones, he said. Well, every man has his breaking point, I suppose. In a few moments you will receive the final commands of His Excellency. Tonight you will go to the capital and speak over the radio. You will have no difficulty there. The speech is written, but it will put a quietus on the activities of our friend Bonnard and the question that has been raised in the British Parliament. Then a few weeks of rest by the sea and the dental work. And then, my dear President of the National Academy, you will be ready to undertake your new duties. I congratulate you and hope we shall meet often under pleasant auspices. He bowed from the waist to Malzius, the bow of a man of the world, though there was still something feline in his mustaches. Then he stood to attention, and Malzius, too, for the dictator had come into the room.